Chapter 56. Blue Star Family, Mid-1940s. Gold. Star tossed banner representing a fallen son. After learning of his death, a gold star hung in the window. When Earl was in France, Clifford in South Asia, and Troy training in Kansas, Perry, the fourth son of Riley and Melinda Harness, signed up for the draft on his 18th birthday in 1943. Perry was in high school at Marshall, Arkansas, and was allowed to graduate before he had to enlist. But on June 15, 1944, Perry Ray Harness was enlisted at Camp Robinson in North Little Rock, Arkansas. He was once again following in the steps of his older brother Earl, from school to the Army. Perry would eventually end up in France, where his brother was. It was customary for mothers to put a blue star in the window for each son who was in service. Melinda didn't hang any blue stars in her window on Bear Creek, but more importantly, she did not have to hang the dreaded gold star as a memorial to a son sacrificed by the war. Riley began a daily practice of putting on a large army coat that one of the boys had given him and went outside after supper. The oldest child at home then was Veda Jo. She asked her mother where Dad was going and learned that her daddy was going up to the orchard to pray for his boys and other young men from Bear Creek who were serving in the war. How helpless Riley must have felt, not able to protect the children he had nurtured all those years. Their lives rested only in God's hands and His mercy. Besides the daily concern that Riley and Melinda had for their son's involvement in the war, the pressures of farming and raising 4 children still at home perhaps helped to take their minds off their worries. Melinda had Veda and Reva to help with domestic chores, but Riley only had the 2 youngest boys, Roy and James R., to help him farm. Nora Bell, Riley's half-sister, who was in her mid-50s with special needs, also remained with the family. Additionally, Riley's sister Arizona was very poor, and his sister Elizabeth was both poor and neglected by her husband, who had walked away from her at the Chinquapin Cemetery to live with another woman. Riley and Melinda had a lot to worry them, but they believed God was merciful, and He would sustain them through it all. Perry was suited for Army life, as he and his brothers had often slept at night under the stars. Additionally, he had gotten up at 4:30 a.m. during his high school years to do janitorial work at the Lindsay Hotel, where he was staying in Marshall. He was prepared for making wake-up call when he entered the Army. As he was about to finish up school, Perry had no fine clothes to wear for his graduation. However, a man died while staying in room number 7 of the Lindsay Hotel and left a wool suit. The hotel owner, Mrs. McConnell, gave it to Perry. With a little alteration, he wore it and said that he liked to have burned up as the weather was warm and sticky. The postman who carried the mail from Marshall and up Bear Creek was Bob Russell. He was a hired carrier and would also do courier of small things for folks. Perry would send his soiled clothing home, and Melinda would wash them and send them back by Bob. The laundry delivery round trip was a charge of 5 cents. Perry said when he opened his clean laundry, his nose would smell the Mary War lye soap his mother used, and it would make him lonesome for home. His older brother Earl had done the same when he lived in Marshall. Perry's basic training was at Camp Wheeler near Macon, Georgia. It was a staging location for U.S. Army units during World War II. A 1,000-bed hospital was constructed there for returning wounded soldiers. After completing his basic training on November 20th, 1944, he was transported to Camp Shanks, New York, which was the largest embarkation camp during the war. The Queen Elizabeth ocean liner had been converted for wartime into a transport ship with a record capacity of hauling 16,683 troops and nicknamed the Gray Ghost for its camouflage color to avoid German U-boats. Hitler put a bounty of $250,000 as reward to any who could sink her. The ship safely made harbor at Glasgow, Scotland, where Perry's brother Earl had also landed in the motherland of Scotland. A second son had now gone to protect the British Isles in this great war of wars. During the war, there were more than 500 German air raids over Scotland, causing 2,500 deaths and 8,000 injuries. After disembarking, the troops were put on trains and traveled south toward London, where Perry boarded a smaller ship to sail across the English Channel to Le Havre, France. The French port had recently been recaptured from the Germans, allowing the Allied armies to have a place to land and move inland with supplies. Before Perry's arrival to France, his brother Earl had successfully survived the D-Day landing, and his unit turned toward the port city of Cherbourg. Its capture gave the Allied forces their first deep water harbor. Over 11,000 German prisoners of war were taken in the conquest and surrender of the city. The large number led to the construction of a prison camp on the edge of the city that was handed over to the French authorities. Over 400,000 prisoners were brought to America and housed in over 700 camps, as well as Japanese and Italian prisoners. Most found prison life in America better than normal life in their homeland. After securing Cherbourg, Earl's unit set its sights on the capital city of Paris, which lay about 250 miles away. All across Normandy, the Romans in ancient times had built earth dikes around fields which grew into thickets. The Germans had fortifications throughout hidden in the hedgerows. These hedged fields with narrow wagon trails made the landscape a defender's haven and an attacker's hell. The Allied troops were being slaughtered by the hidden machine guns, but an armor sergeant equipped a tank with a plow on its front that allowed it to push through the hedgerows and make inroads where needed. Named Rhino Tank, its success was copied, and the troops advanced and defeated the enemy. Unfortunately, more soldiers died in the hedgerows in about 6 weeks than they did on the beaches. Earl lived to tell how the fields in the hedgerow battle had dead cows, sheep, and horses that were caught in the fray. The Germans used a rocket launcher that the Allies called Screaming Mimi. The sound the mortar shell made from tortured air sounded like a scream. It was used to launch highly explosive blasts and sometimes poison gas. The shrapnel from the explosion and the burst was deadly, and it was the scariest and nearest to death that Earl had seen thus far in the war. One evening, as his unit was laying low, they heard Army tanks going down a nearby road all night long. The sound of their tracks rattled and shook the ground as they passed. Word came that General Patton's tanks were arriving to lead them into the Battle of St. Lo. Between July 7th and 19th, 1944, the battle took place, first with heavy bombardments and then with tanks and infantry. Leaflets dropped from the air the night before citizens were warned to flee, but civilian casualties were high in St. Lo, and German-held prisoners, 200 men, were executed. Sergeant Harness was a medic, and his tasks were to help the wounded with first aid and giving plasma when needed, while transporting them to the field hospital, where doctors could treat them. Most were transported on a stretcher, and it was a great risk to help the wounded and dying. Many were shredded by the shrapnel, and some shot through by machine bullets. It was a bloody job, all the while trying to avoid being shot and praying that you wouldn't be blown up. Medics like Earl had a white band on both arms with a red cross and one on the front of their helmet. Some said the Red Cross emblem was a target for the Germans to shoot at. Reflection: Perry was still stateside while Earl had been in the battle for Normandy for a month. Imagine a baptism of fire every day and having to sleep hunkered down with mostly rations for meals, risking your life to help the wounded, and hearing the cries of men in pain and death. The smells, the sounds, the sights, all combined with emotions and adrenaline colliding with visceral impulses. The distress drove some men to insanity and long-term psychiatric illness. Veterans of war need the support and help of us who enjoy the freedom they fought for. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore. Isaiah 2:4.